Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to join us. So today, we're going to talk a little bit less about investing in experiential technology through the lens of an investment, but we're going to look at it through the lens of one of the world's largest corporate VCs and consumer electronics manufacturers who touch pretty much all aspects of human life, from microwave ovens to airplanes and washing machines and mobile phones and everything in between. But since this is a human performance technology, we thought really the lens to view this whole thing through would be really taking a look at the human body and where Samsung really sort of has a connectivity to that. And I thought it would be interesting to start it off with actually a little bit of a vision piece which Samsung has put together to help share kind of how they're thinking about it and where it's going. So maybe we would start with that. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
What if your body had a voice? A voice that could speak to you in a clear way that you understand? What if you could ask questions and hear answers from your heart, your lungs, your muscles, your skin? What if this conversation happened every moment of every day? You would learn a lot, and you would live a better life. You could adjust your habits according to your body's advice. You could share information with your doctor. Imagine the possibilities, the mysteries unlocked, the insights gained. It would change your life and the life of everyone you care about. What if your body had a voice?
So that's really cool. And it says a lot without actually saying anything. And so what I thought would be really fun would be to spend a little bit of time kind of drilling into almost all of the components that were sort of implied there, but not clearly stated. But I think it would be really helpful for Shankar to spend a moment just sort of framing the Samsung worldview on how they think about venture investing, where the Catalyst Fund fits in, and then we can actually kind of drill down into that piece right there, if that's okay.
Happy to do that. Folks, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. This is such an amazing place, and Jazz Ventures and the rest of the folks here put together an amazing show, so very delighted to be here. A little bit about Samsung Electronics. Most of you folks know the brand, have probably used a bunch of our products. To give you a little bit of sense of the scale that the company is, we are a $200 billion a year revenue company. It's one of the largest technology companies by revenue. We are a global company. The products range, as John talked about, from microwave ovens, smart fridges, to semiconductor chips, memory chips, to smartphones. The company has done quite well over the years in being either number one, number two in each of the markets that it participates in. The interesting thing about this company is about 35 years ago, the company was basically trading in dried fish powder. That's where we started. But we started building memory chips for semiconductors, and the rest is history. To give you a sense of what I do for the company has always felt that it's a core technology company, and most of the innovation in the past has come from our R&D and the work that we've done in Korea. In the last 5 years or so, as we see the world dramatically changing around us, we've come to believe that the most disruptive ideas really come from startups. And the question really becomes, how do we get ahead of the curve? How do we get to know startups well before they may become successful, and therefore find a way to work with them and bring that innovation into the company? So we've done venture capital investments for 20 years. In the past, they used to be more tactical. We might invest in a company to help them survive as a company so they can supply parts, components to us. But in the last 5 years, we put together Samsung Catalyst Fund that's really focused on early stage investments. And combined with the early stage and mid to late stage investments, we invest close to $200 million a year, about 50 to 60 new investments per year globally. About half of those roughly are here in the US, a quarter or so in Europe, and another quarter in Israel. So that gives you a scale of what I do.
That's fantastic. And you do that all with a pretty small team as well.
It's the global investment team is about 25 people. The early stage investment team is about 10 of us.
That's
and,
incredible.
and roughly we are split up into 3 geographies. Yeah.
And one of the reasons, just for those of you out there who don't know this, one of the things that Samsung's very sort of forward-looking in is their ability to invest in this area that's a little bit fuzzy between the lines of human biology and life sciences and digital technologies. And that's one of our theses at Jazz as well. So we spend a lot of time looking at things together. So I would love to actually talk about that first, again, before we kind of go into the quantified human side of things. So talk about through some of the challenges of doing venture investing in that multidisciplinary area for a second.
Absolutely. So I think until a few years ago, I think we lived in separate silos. I think the life sciences folks never quite worked with the technology folks, and the technology folks never did work with the life sciences folks. And I think we spoke different languages, completely different languages. I think what has happened in the last few years is simply amazing. We actually call it a full innovation cycle about biology and neuroscience influencing technology, and technology in turn going back to influence biology and the human body and brain, which makes us live a better life. Let me spend a few seconds on it. I think deep learning as a technology is relatively new. It's only 4 or 5 years old. And I think it's a form of AI that is making some fundamental difference in the way we interact with computers, things like natural language processing, things like image recognition, and things like that, giving the computers eyes and ears. All of this has happened because of deep learning, but deep learning was fundamentally inspired by the way the human brain looks at information and processes that information. So that was the inspiration, and we had some really big breakthroughs in AI. Going back the other way, technology influencing life sciences, I think what has happened, I think, is technology has gotten to the point of being a low enough price point as well as high enough accuracy that you can begin to hear the voice of the body, which is, what is our body really telling us? Can we really understand what we eat? Can we really understand how our body is feeling today? Can we listen to it, and then using that information, can we fundamentally change the way we live, change the way we do things like physical fitness, or even do things such that it really makes a difference in making a performance difference in our human body. So that's really happening today, and this virtuous cycle is where we are operating. I think across the board, whether it's the Internet of Things or digital health or smart machines. For us, smart machines is about drones and autonomous driving and robotics. This virtuous cycle is where we see the opportunity, and that's where we are investing.
So that's great. So the voice of the body starts off by measuring things and quantifying bits, so that the sensory sort of universe is growing and expanding. So quick poll here: who is wearing some kind of a sensor or tracker today, like a Fitbit or a motion? And how many of those track your steps? How many track something other than steps? So there's a couple. So I think what we saw is there is definitely an interest in quantifying, bits of your daily life, your physical anatomy, your physiology, and yet something so simple as a pedometer, really caught everybody's attention because it was the first thing that was simple enough, easy enough, connected enough to have some impact on your behavior. What I'd love to do is say, if it started with steps, which I think everybody gets the hang, is probably not the end goal, but a great starting point, where is it going from there? And I think that video gave a little bit of a projection into that view.
A great question. Let me spend a few minutes on this. There are several applications that sensors can really help the human body. Let me give you an analogy first. Today, an automobile, a car, a new car that you might purchase has easily over 400 sensors spread across the car. And you might remember, several of you folks who've been driving for 20 years or so, 20 years ago, not only did you have to check the tire pressure to make sure that you have a safe car, you also had to use an oil dipstick to know if you have enough oil on the engine. You don't have to do that anymore. The car does it for you. These sensors are spread around the car. that finds out what exactly is going on. It only tells you that something is wrong. It doesn't keep telling you what the oil level is. Maybe it does for the folks who really want to know about it. But what it does is it tells you when something is wrong. And that surfaces up to your dashboard, and you can do something about it. Now, the human body, we really don't wear sensors. And in fact, we really don't quite understand the human body. And I think the first step of going out and counting the number of steps is really the first innings of a very, very long game here about really understanding the human body. Some of the great innovations that we have invested in the last few years, maybe I can give a few examples. There's a company, well, to back up, I think we all know that most of us, if we live old enough, we're either going to get in cardiovascular disease or diabetes or cancer, right? So I think the thing is, some of these diseases, particularly cardiovascular or diabetes, are very much lifestyle related. And just a few numbers, I think in the year 1980, about 20 to 30 million people around the world were diagnosed with diabetes. Today, that number is 350 million. And if you look at the number of potential pre-diabetic patients around the world, it's close to over 1 billion. That's 1 out of 7 around the world. So that is a massive increase. And it's really the lifestyle, a sedentary lifestyle, and countries like China and India coming online to the same lifestyle that the Western world is used to. And you have this massive increase that's happening. Now, if sensors could really measure say blood pressure, for example, and not just once a year when we go in for our physical checkup, but continuous blood pressure. That gives you a great way, and going back to the car analogy, if you want to know how well the engine's doing, you have sensors that tells you how that pump is working. I want to know how my pump is working, right? I want to know if I can measure my blood pressure continuously so that I know that my heart is working well, and in case it's not, I need to go get it checked out, right? Quite similarly on diabetes, I think most of the type 1 or type 2 diabetes patients have to prick themselves several times a day to know what is their blood glucose levels. What if you could do that non-invasively and non-obtrusively? What if you could do that in such a way that it tells you what you should be eating so that you can metabolize it better? I think these are some examples where there are a few startups that are really pioneering their way into solving these very difficult problems. And if they actually succeed, I think we can get the same kind of experience that we have in a car today.
Oh, that's great. And so some of those things you mentioned are for, call it medical conditions like diabetes, or even kind of avoidance of medical conditions and tracking them. But then some of them are just more general consumer, broadly applicable to all of humanity. Steps being one thing. But talk about a few of those as well. And I guess the other thing is form factor. I would love to hit at the same time. So what we're seeing is a consolidation of all of the bits of electronics continuing to consolidate down into your phone. So of the sensor sort of explosion that's happening, which ones are going to move into there? Which ones are going to move into a watch? Which ones are going to take on other form factors? And how do you see that playing out around the body itself?
Yep, no, happy to. So here's the way we think about it. There are certain types of sensors that if you're going to wear in your body, so let's say it's clothing or your wrist or some other wearable device, it's really great for doing continuous measurement. And it's not very clear what kind of parameters need to be measured in a very continuous way. It's likely that some of these can just be measured once a day, and that's still way better than doing it once a year. And there are others where there may be some real good insights by measuring several times a day. So I think it's really a lot of science, I think, needs to be focused on figuring out what is useful. I think the way I see it, I actually have probably tried every wearable device that's been put out, not only by Samsung, but all of our competitors as well. I have a whole top drawer full of them. I think most of those are quite nice, and they probably help you interact with a smartphone, or probably help you count the number of steps, and can probably measure your heart rate. None of these really do anything fundamentally unique, I think, to the human body. They don't tell you the kind of things that that I would like for the industry to go in, which is pre-diabetes or being able to tell someone before they have a cardiovascular disease. And for us, the way we think about it is unless a sensor is accurate enough and good enough in a clinical setting, it is going to be totally useless in the consumer setting. And that's a really strong statement. The reason why I'm saying that is because if you look around the room here, there's a tremendous amount of diversity among us. There's a huge demographic change and age diversity as well. Sensors really have to work across a very large section of population, if not everybody. And sensors have to be proven in a double-blinded test run by a third party where they actually are working quite accurately. And if you could do that, and then you can then transfer that into a consumer technology, then you begin to think about, okay, how do I prevent that billion people who are pre-diabetic from becoming diabetic, right? So that is really powerful for a company like Samsung. We are not a medical company. We are really a consumer company. And I think the big thing for us is, can we use technology to help people live a better life? And I think that's where we are headed, which is prevention of these really expensive diseases versus cure.
And I think that's fantastic, by the way. That's a great segue. So seeing that consumer electronics companies actually are still counting on validated science, which I'm sure will resonate with the people in this room here. And effectively, the thesis there is that if you can show the science is valid, then you know the product will fundamentally work. Whereas otherwise, you're just fighting a marketing battle.
Exactly.
And so to that end, do you actually need to hire research scientists to sort of execute against that, or do you rely on academia to help?
We really work with the world's experts. So we are, I see my colleagues from UCSF here, Adam Gazzaley and several others. Samsung is really focused on what we are good at. We are good at making devices, right? We make several hundred million smartphones a year. That's what we are good at, and we are probably better at that than anybody else. But we're not experts in the life sciences. We do have folks hired up internally, but we are really focused on working with the world's best experts. UCSF, we're working with UCSF. Let me give you another example. One of the key things that's important as we try to improve our performance and live a better life, we talked about sensors that measure the human body, and I alluded to really understanding what we're eating. I think what we're eating is who we are, right? So it's really an important piece of information that I don't think people actually know today. I think there's so much misinformation about food, and there's so much unknown about what our body is getting out of food that I think it really is important to make some pretty big improvements in that area.
Yep.
So Samsung, for example, has partnered with Nestle. Nestle is the world's largest food company, and we're the world's largest electronics company. And the objective is quite simple. We want to figure out what are the nutrients you're getting from your daily diet, and what is the variance between what you should be getting versus what you're getting. And therefore, can we tell you what to eat and what to eat better, so that with that combined with helping you, perhaps live an active life and perhaps helping you sleep better, just these three things we think will make a fundamental difference.
That's fantastic. So I don't want to be the one to get between everybody here and lunch, but I did want to sort of ask one more question, and that's, I'm sure everybody or many people in the room here have businesses that in some way, shape, or form will eventually touch Samsung or have the interest in doing so. So it might be helpful to actually just sort of walk through what's the best way for entrepreneurs to connect with the organization there.
Very good question. And we are a very large company, right? We are a global company. And I think I'll be the first one to admit that Samsung is an incredibly difficult company to navigate, just because we are just so much out there and we have so many competing efforts even internally in almost every single objective that we have. So how do you navigate this very complex and yet quite successful company? The investment team, the global investment team, really acts as an on-ramp to working with a company. So there are two pieces to Samsung. One is our existing businesses, like the smartphone business, our semiconductor business, and our consumer electronics business. These massive business units that each do between $10 to $50 billion in revenue, are really focused on working with technologies built by startups that are ready today, right? And we can act as a on-ramp to evaluate and make the right connections, whether we invest or not. Our job is to make sure that Samsung can work with the most disruptive startups around the world. The second piece of Samsung is where we're headed over the next 20 years. And the places where we're headed in the next 20 years are these 4 areas. IoT. We believe that there's going to be 30 to 40 billion connected devices around us, not just a couple of billion cell phones that we have today. We also believe digital health, as we talked about, is going to be transformational. Samsung does not have a business there today, but aspirationally, we would love to be there. The third area is smart machines, which is everything from drones and robotics to ADAS, or advanced driver assist systems, or autonomous driving, giving cars eyes and ears, et cetera. That's another massive area. And underlying for all of these areas is a data infrastructure. You're going to be creating so much data from these sensors. Imagine putting so many of those sensors on the human body. The amount of data that needs to be looked at is tremendous. So we think a new data infrastructure is needed to look at all of this. So these are the 4 areas where Samsung's aspirationally building new businesses, and that's where my team is focused as well. So I think the intersection for these new areas is really right here in the Valley. Samsung employs close to 30,000 employees in the US. And in the Bay Area, we have close to 5,000 employees. We have 5,000 engineers. So our work here is to really work with Silicon Valley and with all the hotspots, technology hotspots around the world. And the investment team can act as an on-ramp for you guys to work with Samsung.
Great, thanks so much. And so on that note, I think that's a good time to pause for lunch. Unless anybody has any burning questions, jump up and down if you do. Otherwise, we can answer them one at a time here. My main question that I really want to spend a little time with Shankar on is are microwaves actually spying on us or not? But, but that's for another session. So yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it,
John. Quite a pleasure.
Thanks, John and Shankar. I'm hungry now. Let's go eat. We'll be meeting back here at 1:30. We're going to have a fantastic panel on experiential technologies to improve physical performance. We're going to have an ex-Navy SEAL, the man who's in charge at the Philadelphia Eagles for their physical performance technology, and a couple of entrepreneurs having a great conversation. So go out, go play with the expo, get some lunch, and come on back at 1:30. Thank you.